Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming today. My name is Madison Taylor. I'm a senior here at Lewis and Clark, and I am the president of SCIT, which is Students for Cultural Inclusion in the Theater. We're a club, and we are a resource for students who are not often in the theater community and who often aren't afforded the opportunity to be part of theater. So we really try to reach out to students of color and just different other marginalized identities to be a part of the theater community and get these opportunities. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is by partnering with the Ray Warren Symposium and putting on a small play sometime during that symposium. It's been going on for a few years now. Before I knew about SCIT, before I knew about theater, when I was a first year at Lewis and Clark, this is the way that I was introduced into the theater community here at the college. And I have been a part of every Ray Warren Symposium event, except for when I wasn't able to since. And for the past few years, we have had the wonderful opportunity to be able to work with Josie Seed, who is just a smart, remarkable woman who has been writing and directing a few plays for us for Ray Warren, and really just kind of fostering a wonderful little community for these SCIT performances. So I will pass it off to her.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, friends. So happy to have you here. I love this symposium because it's probably one of the most thought-provoking pieces of work that I've seen happen in a college, and I love it. So let's talk about this place we are right now, this play. It's not a play. It's, I would call it more of a mock trial. And you, glorious viewers, are our jury. Don't get freaked out. It's going to be great. So it came to pass this time that we're in, where there's so much going on in our world. And I was looking at all of the protests that were happening. And I was like, yay, protests. But then also part of my heart was hurting, right? Because there are things that happen during protests that are not necessarily as good for the protests as we would want, regardless of who is inciting those times. Can you have one without the other, you know? And so that's kind of where the idea for this particular piece came from, was to create a space to have those discussions that are on either side, and also to prove you all are going to be a glorious social experiment to prove that people can have discussions on each side, on two different sides, and just have a discussion. So at the end of this amazing piece of work that's done by these people they're so good. They're so good. You all are in for a treat. We're going to break you into rooms where you will deliberate. I'm going to tell you what you're going to deliberate, but don't get freaked out. Like I said, it's going to be so fun. So you're going to deliberate if the movements that were spoken of were appropriate to create the change that we wanted. So a vote for guilty is yes, the movement, it was necessary. Not guilty, that's on the other side. It's kind of confusing. But not guilty means no. They weren't doing a great job at making change. What I will also say is, if you get in the room and just have an awesome conversation, that's really why we're here. So don't feel like you have to come change the world. But we did want to give you just a space to talk about it and maybe learn some stuff. I learned some things as I was writing this, so I'm hoping that you all will learn some things as well. The one other thing I would love for you to do, well, I think there's two. One of them is, if you are on Zoom and there are more of you in the room than just one, if you would, on your name, where your name usually is, could you please just say, if there's 3 of us, you know, just put that there, because we'll probably have a couple, 2 or 3 breakout rooms, just so that they don't get too large for good conversation. And that'll let us know how many people are talking. The final thing that we'd love for you to do when the time comes is, when you get into your breakout rooms, into your jury rooms, go ahead and appoint a foreman. Usually in proceedings of this nature, it happens so that we know who's going to be the person who will be telling us about what your verdict is. And we'd love to hear just a couple of lines about what kind of conversation happened in the room, what came up for you. So that's all I have to say. So happy that you're here. I'm so excited to see this piece of work happen here. And with that, I'm not going to tell you to enjoy. Everybody says enjoy. I'm going to say open your mind and take in the People Versus.
Participants of the jury, I address you. We find ourselves in a place both familiar and daunting. It is, after all, our nature as humans to change and evolve. Change is inevitable. It can also be polarizing and frightening. The prosecution and the defense will bring before you articles of evidence encased in moments of history. These moments were born of change and grew into movements that sparked a response on both sides. We seek to answer, were the methods appropriate for the desired outcome? Was there another way? I encourage you to begin with the facts and where you can, sort through your bias to allow the truth to emerge. I turn the floor over to the attorneys who will speak to the process in more depth. Counsel for the prosecution, please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The task I am placing before you will not be unfamiliar. It is, in fact, a very familiar pattern. A child is bullied at school and resorts to fighting. Someone lacks the funds for a certain purchase and resorts to theft. Although we are looking at this on a larger scale, the question is, were the actions taken warranted? I would be remiss if I weren't clear about one thing. That is, what is not on trial? The acts that catalyzed these movements are not the subject of our scrutiny. In many cases, it is clear that the victims of these acts were wronged, in some cases heinously so. However, we live in a civilized country. There are ways and procedures to seek justice and turn the tide. When we open the gates to methods that step outside of the bounds of lawfulness, we invite chaos into our world.
Thank you. Defense, please proceed with your remarks.
Thank you, Your Honor. My colleague has spoken so much truth in their opening address. There are two things that stand out as especially poignant as we hear the evidence. First, the pattern is all too familiar. Entire populations of people are terrorized and oppressed in this country on repeat. There is, indeed, a pattern. Unfortunately, that pattern has become as familiar to this country as one's own heartbeat. The second resounding truth is that we have a process for seeking justice. That is glaringly obvious as we sit here discussing that very thing. I will ask you to contemplate what is the means for enacting change when the prescribed methods aren't working and the need is dire. How does one get the attention of the change makers when they have turned their head and don't appear to be listening? What is appropriate when lives are at stake?
Thank you. Participants of the jury, we will conduct this trial in a unique manner. There will be no questioning of witnesses. Instead, we will present to you several articles of evidence from historical events that may or may not be familiar. We ask that you listen closely while keeping the opening remarks of counsel in mind. You will then have the opportunity to discuss and deliberate what you have seen with other members of the jury. We will then reconvene to discover your verdicts. Let's begin. Our first article of evidence is the Zoot Suit riots. The time is June 1943. The origin of Los Angeles, California, although the riots spread to several other major cities. Summary of the movement. The Zoot Suit riots were a series of violent clashes during which mobs of US servicemen, off-duty police officers, and civilians brawled with young Latinos and other minorities in Los Angeles. The June 1943 riots took their name from the baggy suits worn by many minority youths during that era. But the violence was more about racial tension than fashion. I'd like us all to now bring our attention to Exhibit A.
In June of 1943, the city of Los Angeles experienced one of the most significant episodes of racial violence in the 20th century, known as the Zoot Suit riots. Racial tensions had been rising in the city and were made only worse by the biased reporting of the Los Angeles media. When a group of American sailors attacked a group of mostly Mexican Americans in East LA, the city exploded. In hindsight, this seemed inevitable. With many young men overseas as a result of World War II, labor in the United States was in short supply. So in 1942, the US government reached a deal with Mexico named the Bracero Program, which allowed some Mexican citizens to move to the US as temporary workers. Los Angeles already had a large Mexican-American population, but this new influx of workers provoked greater racial animosity. Much of the white population, whose views were echoed in the mass media, blamed Mexican-American teenagers and young adults for various issues in the city, especially crime. Even the way Mexican-Americans dressed angered the city's more conservative population. Many young Mexican-Americans started donning the Zoot Suit, a style that incorporated an oversized coat, pork pie hat, long chain, thick-soled shoes, and baggy pants. This fashion evolved out of Harlem nightclubs and was popularized by cultural icons like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway. The suits themselves weren't inherently offensive, but in the context of World War II, they were. You see, during the war, wool had been rationed in order to make uniforms for the troops. The very manufacturing of zoot suits with their excessive use of fabric was banned. But a black market developed, and so those zoot suit-wearing Mexican Americans, known as pachucos, were seen as unpatriotic. On the night of August 1st, 1942, pachucos were involved in a brawl in a home near Los Angeles' Sleepy Lagoon. The next morning, the body of Jose Diaz was discovered nearby. The media and police quickly blamed the zoot suit-wearing 38th Street gang. Hundreds of pachucos were rounded up, regardless of affiliation. 22 were eventually found guilty for the Sleepy Lagoon murder in what was later considered a great miscarriage of justice. To some, the verdict was grossly unfair. To others, it confirmed what they already believed, that the zoot suit wearers were inherently violent. This all helped to create a powder keg bound to explode. A few months later, a group of 16 American sailors stationed in Los Angeles claimed they were verbally taunted by a group of Pachuco zoot suiters. Seeking retaliation, the servicemen took cabs over to the Mexican neighborhoods in East LA and started attacking those wearing zoot suits with makeshift weapons. The Pachucos were thrown into the street, their zoot suits torn off and burned on the spot. The ensuing riot continued to snowball over the following days. Violence spread to include both Pachucos and young African-American men. But instead of arresting the attackers, police arrested the victims, supposedly for their own protection. By June 8th, the rioting had become so severe that all military personnel were banned from Los Angeles, and military police were brought in to subdue the attackers. Miraculously, no one was killed, but the impact of the Zoot Suit riots would reach far beyond the number of casualties. Once the dust had settled, Governor Earl Warren commissioned a report that was meant to paint Californians in a more positive light. Instead, the Independent Citizens Commission found the chief cause of the riots was racism, naming the city's newspapers for encouraging the riots and the city government and U.S. military for allowing those riots to continue. Historians view the Zoot Suit riots as a culmination of anti-Mexican racism that had been building for years in Los Angeles, exacerbated by the stresses of World War II. The riots forced the country to face these problems head on and confront the systemic oppression faced by Mexican Americans in Los Angeles and throughout the country.
And now Exhibit B. Exhibit C. And Exhibit D, which is a quote from Carrie McWilliams. On Monday evening, June 7th, thousands of Angelenos turned out for a mass lynching. Marching through the streets of downtown Los Angeles, a mob of several thousand soldiers, sailors, and civilians proceeded to beat up every Zoot Suiter they could find. Streetcars were halted while Mexicans and some Filipinos and Negroes were jerked out of their seats, pushed into the streets, and beaten with sadistic frenzy. I will now invite the counsel for the prosecution to present any statements.
Members of the jury, I offer this for your consideration. When does self-expression cross the line into public defiance? How important is it to wave the flag of individuality, and especially when the flag calls attention to the lack of patriotic solidarity? To be clear, it was not the mere attire that was inflammatory. It was instead the lack of respect for the deprivation others were enduring at a time when all were asked to forego luxury in a time of national sacrifice. As we lay these thoughts on the scales of justice, I ask you to look closely for the leaning of the arms.
Defense.
Look closely indeed. As you consider the request for sacrifice, further consider the audacity of the request. How is it that a mere fashion statement must be accounted for with one's own blood? Members of the jury, these were not soldier uniforms, they were spiffy suits. In a country where self-expression is written into our very Bill of Rights, how is it that this particular right was afforded to some and not to others?
Objection, Your Honor, conjecture.
Overruled. The court allows the statement to stand. Defense, continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense rests.
Very well. Our second article of evidence is the Red Summer of 1919. The time was July 1919. The origin was Washington, D.C., although the violence has spread to other U.S. cities. Summary of the movement. After the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, which formally ended World War I, white sailors recently home from war had been on a days-long drunken rampage, assaulting and in some cases lynching Black people on the capital's streets. The relentless onslaught proved contagious, escalating in dozens of cities across the U.S. in what would become known as the Red Summer. Again, let's call our attention to Exhibit A.
Reeling from the unprecedented devastation of a global pandemic, nurturing wounds from a brutal military victory abroad, struggling to accommodate demobilized soldiers into a slumping economy fraught with heated competition for jobs, Jim Crow's separate but equal policies endorsed by the President of the United States himself, now firmly in place as the law of the land, white supremacists targeted terrorist attacks on an all-too-familiar scapegoat. In another epidemic, Black citizens found themselves on the lethal end of an outbreak of racial violence in 1919, so horrific that the civil rights leader James Weldon Johnson called it the Red Summer. The events unfolding across the United States today, in the wake of the brutal murder of George Floyd, are an eerie repetition of events that marred the history of race relations in this country almost exactly a century ago. African American soldiers returned from noble service in Europe during World War I, fully expecting that their sacrifices to their country would at long last entitle them to their full rights as equal citizens. Instead, the uniforms they wore literally became targets on their backs.
W.E.B. Du Bois famously said that we returned from fighting, we returned fighting. We've saved democracy overseas and we're going to save it in the United States. That didn't happen.
Between April and November of 1919, with the country devastated by an influenza pandemic known as the Spanish flu, racial unrest rolled through the South, the North, and the Midwest, where the Great Migration was just unfolding in its earliest years.
The migration, of course, had transformed large parts of the North and the West. In 1915, there were hardly a few black people in Chicago. By 1919, 1.2 million people have spread themselves across the map.
This demographic transformation of the color of the urban North, coupled with the stresses of a post-war economic downturn, for white resentment and fear.
The pushback was fierce. Chicago was wrecked by fights along a dividing artery between one population and the other. Hundreds of people are dead. Cities are smoldering.
It was one of the most vicious, virulent, and violent race riots in our nation's history.
Small towns were also shaken by race-fueled violence. In Elaine, Arkansas, for example, white vigilantes joined plantation owners, sheriffs, deputies, and even state officials to battle what they called an uprising. Hundreds of black sharecroppers were murdered merely for trying to form a union. Yet in the aftermath, a grand jury callously indicted more than 100 black women and men for their so-called crimes. Of course, racial violence was anything but new in the America of that time. Still, amid the fallout from the Great War, the rising generation, calling themselves New Negroes, was not about to fold their tents. Instead, Red Summer saw black Americans not only picking up arms to defend themselves, but also utilizing political organizations like the NAACP to challenge the violence in Congress, in the courts, in the media, and on the streets. In If We Must Die, the poet Claude McKay captured the tenor of the times in his immortal call for defiance in the face of tyranny and terror. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back.
And now Exhibit B. Exhibit C. And Exhibit D, quote, "As far back as the first movement of the American troops to France, the Negro publicists began to avail themselves of the argument that since the Negro was fit to wear the uniform he was, therefore fit for everything else," end quote. And Exhibit F, quote, "One of the principal elements causing concern is the returned Negro soldier, who is not readily fitting back into his prior status of pre-war times," end quote. We'll hear arguments from the prosecution.
Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution rests.
You have nothing to offer the jury in regards to the evidence.
I do not, Your Honor. I feel the evidence speaks for itself. In order to maintain my position in these proceedings on this particular subject, I prefer to maintain silence.
Very well. Defense?
Thank you, Your Honor. I will then keep my comments brief. I will submit that my colleague's reticence is due to one unyielding truth, that there is no defense for the behavior that was exhibited in the Red Summer movement. The callous and audacious expectations that U.S. soldiers fight and die for freedoms that they were not allowed is, in fact, the epitome of injustice.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is projecting.
Sustained. Our final article of evidence is the U.S. practice of eugenics. The time is early 1900s to today. The origin is Long Island, New York, although the practice has spread across the U.S. Summary of the movement. The eugenics movement took root in the United States in the early 1900s, led by Charles Davenport, 1866 to 1944, a prominent biologist, and Harry Laughlin, a former teacher and principal interested in breeding. In 1910, Davenport founded the Eugenics Record Office, the ERO, at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory on Long Island to, quote, improve the natural, physical, mental, and temperamental qualities of the human family, end quote. Laughlin was the first director. Field workers for the ERO collected many different forms of data, including family pedigrees depicting the inheritance of physical, mental, and moral traits. They were particularly interested in the inheritance of undesirable traits, such as pauperism, mental disability, dwarfism, promiscuity, and criminality. The ERO remained active for 3 decades. The source is America's Hidden History, the Eugenics Movement. Once more, let's call our attention to Exhibit A.
Come as a surprise, but a sterilization policy known as eugenics existed in this country for years. In fact, 33 states had a eugenics program in the early 1900s. Most ended after World War II. However, North Carolina's program ran until 1974. About 7,600 people in North Carolina were sterilized, many of them forcefully. Of those, about 3,000 are alive today. North Carolina is now trying to determine how to make amends for its sterilization program at a hearing today in Raleigh, where victims had a chance to tell their stories. And joining us now from Raleigh, Dolores Marks, whose mother was a victim of the state's forced sterilization program, and Darren Bax with the John Locke Foundation. Darren, let me begin with you. Why this hearing today, and what are the chances that North Carolina will make amends?
Well, the state has been looking at compensating the nearly 3,000 living victims for a while now, and the state is getting serious about it. You know, unfortunately, North Carolina is one of the rare states that actually increased the number of forced sterilizations after World War II. So where other states kind of stopped sterilizing people and learned the lessons from Nazi Germany, North Carolina didn't. About 77% of those sterilized occurred after World War II. And there's so many living victims, it's about time that we compensated those people.
And these were people, just so I understand, Darren, these were people who the state deemed, mentally unfit?
The state deemed unfit, unworthy to reproduce. And what they would do is they would categorize them in a category called feeble-minded. And that was just a catch-all phrase. It was just a way to make sure that some people didn't reproduce, a way to ensure that we reduce welfare rolls. Basically, it was a way to kind of get people that they didn't want to have reproduce not in the general population anymore.
Mm-hmm. Dolores, I'd like to bring you in here to the conversation. I know that you're waiting and hoping for amends related to your mother's sterilization, your mother's case. Can you tell me what this would mean to you if the state did try and make this right?
Well, it has gone on entirely too long, and my sisters and I, we've been working on this. And for the living victims, it would mean quite a bit of not only health care, but help for them. For us, it would make us feel much better. It would amend something that was done to my mother years ago, even though she's not alive today. But it would help us to go on because we had to put our lives on hold to take care of what Cherry Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina, sent back home to us.
What were the circumstances, just very briefly, Dolores, of what happened to your mom? Why was she sterilized?
After having my brother, she had postpartum syndrome. That's what it's called today. She was sent to Goldsboro Hospital, and she was put on very strong medications. She was kept there for 12 years. She worked in that hospital. We're assuming that the medicine was, they would free up the medicine in order for her to work. And then in 1965, she was almost 40 years old. They put her on one medication, sterilized her, and sent her home.
I'm
she did well.
Darren, this sounds like Nazi Germany, does it not?
It comes from the same place, the concept of negative eugenics, that we're going to try to control who's going to reproduce. So it does come from the same place. Nazi Germany certainly took it further than North Carolina did. North Carolina is not necessarily unique. Many other states, as you mentioned before, did sterilize many people. It just so happens that we have a lot of living victims. It's also important to remember that this is not some long ago history. This program lasted until the 70s, at least. So, there's many living victims as a result of the fact that we've been sterilizing people for a long time, and it wasn't that long ago when this happened.
So do you think we've learned anything from this, Darren? I mean, what lessons are to be learned from something so horrific in our own country's history, forced sterilization?
That's the million-dollar question. I hope that certainly we learn don't forcibly sterilize people, but I think most importantly, we want to learn the lesson that the idea of pushing the greater good at the expense of fundamental rights is not a good idea. We have to be very careful. And what happened here was the state, through the use of force, physically invaded the bodies of innocent people and took away their most basic fundamental right. And that never should happen. It never should happen again.
Dolores, I know you said that your mother is no longer alive today, but what would she think of this now that the state is trying to hopefully make this right?
I think she would be happy about what the state is doing, but I think she would be very upset as to what they did to her.
And can you ever forgive what's happened here to so many people in North Carolina and across the country, Dolores?
Of course, I can forgive, because I believe there's a God, and I can forgive. And what will make my family feel better is that we continue to help with the fight. My mother's gone, but she still lives through us, and we will continue to fight this to see that justice is done, not only for our family, but for all of the families, over 7,000 or more.
I'll turn it over to the prosecution for remarks.
A scientist returns from a 2-week vacation to discover that mold had collected on an accidentally exposed culture. That discovery was the beginning of what we now call the antibiotic penicillin. A feverish Andean man was lost in the jungle and suffering from malaria. Parched, he drank from a pool of water at the base of a quina tree, and quinine was discovered. There are countless examples of scientific discoveries that were intended and used to better humanity. Any of these discoveries, if placed into the wrong hands, has the potential for great harm. Should we, then, put all scientists on trial for attempting to rid the world of disease and unnecessary suffering? My hope is that you will be able to disentangle original intent from misinformed execution.
Defense?
Members of the jury, I thank you for your attention and patience thus far. I pose to you this question. Shall those who seek to alter one's ability to make decisions about their place in this world be held blameless when they are aware that those efforts strip those people of their very rights? A baby has a fierce bout of colic and cries nonstop for nights on end. It is disturbing to the neighbors, and even the child is showing signs of stress. Do we cut out their tongues to halt the disturbing ruckus for their own good? A young man who is down on his luck steals a loaf of bread to feed his family. Do we inflict a vasectomy on him so that he cannot bring more children into this world that he cannot feed? Who is qualified to make these decisions? Eugenics suggests that man has the authority to decide who is fit and how to solve society's genetic problems, but who decides whose opinions are desirable and who shall stand? I submit that in the case of certain unsolicited, irreversible alterations to the human body, no external entity should have the right to say, for the good of humanity, especially when those making the claim are far from humanity's creators.
Members of the jury, we have heard arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. As you form your judgment, I ask you to discuss the evidence we have submitted and weigh it against both the facts and your convictions. Our hope is that we are able to not only engage in open-minded conversation on these movements, but that we are also able to open our minds to other viewpoints to reach consensus on the appropriateness of the efforts of them. We will separate you into groups in which you will discuss each article of evidence. We ask that you come back prepared to share your verdict on whether the movement is guilty of overstepping its bounds and the basis around your decision. I'll now call the deliberation process to order. Thank you for your efforts in this trial.